amazing team for all the hard work that went into preparing those talks. I'm going to just end with coming at this from a slightly different direction and talk about the process. So we have, there we go. So we've talked about all the ways to reduce the interventions that could reduce the CO2 emissions in a community, but we also need a new process. And we have been working on what we think of as a city science process that has these components. So we start with insight, which is using all the fantastic sources of data and the analytic tools that we have to understand what the situation is today. That's what we did for this model to determine what the emissions in Kendall Square would be currently. And then we go to transformation. Transformation are all those interventions that can improve on the conditions, and you heard some of them from the team: mobility, housing, food technology, et cetera. Lots of good ideas out there, and often it ends with an idea that has not been tested. So this third step is really critical: prediction. How can you predict the potential impact of all those interventions that you've identified in the previous step? Okay, that gets you pretty far along in the process, but there's a fourth critical component, which is consensus, particularly when you're talking about these urban issues. I mean, if you were to propose 40, 50,000 new apartments for Kendall Square, unless you can bring the government and the existing population and the corporate leaders along to reach a consensus about the future, nothing innovative will happen at that scale. And then we're increasingly realizing there's a fifth piece, which is governance, which is related to public policy and regulation and the systems that could maintain a high level of performance. So the work we presented earlier basically deals with the first three. Every one of those projects dealing with the insight, transformation, prediction. Let's talk a little bit about the other two, consensus. So we build these platforms that use Lego bricks. People say, why do you use Lego bricks? Well, if you're doing a workshop with a community, it can't be precious. People need to understand that they can just manipulate it and play with it. So we use these optically tagged Lego bricks connected to some pretty powerful simulation technology that operates in the back end. And if you have a chance to visit our lab on the third floor, you can see these platforms. We think of this as a kind of extended intelligence. They're designed to do what humans do best, which is to make value judgments, think about possibilities, weigh options, together with what machines do best, which is process numbers and do calculations, and ultimately AI systems that can suggest things that humans might not have ever have thought about. You'll hear a little bit about that this afternoon. So these are just examples of these. Sometimes we call them augmented intelligence, a different type of AI. Just one example, because we have our friends from Gesa and her team from Hamburg here. There was a project we did in Hamburg for the Grassbook project. We started on that, and then Hamburg was hit with an influx of 70, 80,000 refugees, they were thinking. So we built a platform for the community, for them to identify sites to build housing for the refugees. And it was very much a bottom-up consensus building platform with a very contentious, politically charged issue. And at the end of these workshops, the table would look like this. People could get feedback as they would move these little Lego pieces around, and they would come back and discuss it and essentially compete with other districts to see who could accommodate the most refugees. It was a very interesting problem, and The Atlantic did an article on it. We built these kind of platforms all over the world. Many of our City Science affiliate members have them in their labs. We've done some larger, more commercial scale deployments in Shenzhen and Hangzhou. I think we're just beginning figure out the potential of that technology. Governance, too. This is something that I'm very focused on right now, and I do believe that this is true, that restrictive zoning policy may be the greatest barrier to climate change solutions. We've seen that action at the scale of the neighborhood is really critical. It's very hard to change things because of current approaches to obsolete zoning regulations that date back almost 100 years. Just very quickly, the kind of ideas we're thinking about, you could take a 3-story building in Kendall Square, maybe that's maybe that's the maximum FAR. You could double that in an opt-in incentive zoning system. You could say, for example, this is for the community to decide, 50% of that increased value, because you're transferring value to the landowner through this upzoning, should go back to the community. And it could go in the form of assets or endowment. The assets could be the developer actually incorporates things that the community needs into the project, essential housing, daycare, grocery, pharmacy, things that we do not have in Kendall Square. Alternatively, you could create an endowment that the community taps into. It could be a local token economy, supporting local businesses, rent-to-own programs, all kinds of possibilities there. Could be a combination of the two. And that mapping of assets to incentives could be dynamic. You could have continuous data feeds. You get enough of this asset and you dial back the incentive and you dial it up in another. So it could be continuous, computational, dynamic, and much more responsive, creating the kind of feedback mechanisms you have in a natural ecosystem. And all of this could be empowered by the new tools of our time, which are smart contracts, blockchain, data analytics, simulation, et cetera. And it could be empowered by these new kinds of what we think of as ESG community metrics. So that's a summary of our process. And that ends the first part of our program. This afternoon, we're going to take a break now. We'll come back. We'll hear from Norman again. We'll talk about Kharkiv. We'll talk about applying some of these ideas to a real-world project with tremendous potential. So thank you all. We'll see you soon.